My wife cheated with her boss, and we just found out she's been siphoning off $250, $0 from our joint account to fund her affair. Now she's claiming she deserves half our house in the divorce, even though I built it with my inheritance. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, writing about how my wife cheated on me and stole more money than I ever imagined possible. It all started with a gut feeling, then spiraled into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The craziest thing. I found out she was screwing her boss, and on top of that, she'd siphoned off $250,000 from our joint account to fund her affair. Yeah, I know, who the hell does that? But that's exactly what happened. Her name's Jessica, and I still remember the day I started sensing something was off. She'd been acting weird for a few weeks, secretive, evasive, always on her phone, hiding her screen when I came into the room. At first, I thought maybe she was just stressed at work, or maybe she was planning a surprise for me. We'd been together for about 7 years, married for 4, and honestly, I thought I knew everything about her, but I didn't. Not really. One night, I was working late on a project at home when I noticed a strange charge on our bank statement. It was a $5, $0 withdrawal from an ATM downtown. I didn't recognize the location, and it was made during a time I knew she was supposed to be at her office. That made my stomach drop. I started digging through the account history, and that's when I saw it, more withdrawals, big ones, all linked to her credit card. Then I found the real shocker, a series of transfers to an account I'd never seen before, all labeled under her name but with a different account number. That's when I realized she was siphoning money, big chunks over time, enough to buy a house or a car. I didn't say anything right away. Instead, I started watching her more closely. She'd leave her phone unlocked sometimes, and I'd glance at her messages. Nothing concrete at first, just some flirtatious text, but it was enough to get the ball rolling. Then, one day, I got a text from her boss, an inappropriate, suggestive message that made my blood boil. I couldn't believe it. Jessica was cheating on me with Richard, her boss. It was blatant. The way she'd talk about him, act around him, like he was the only thing that mattered. I couldn't believe I was living through this. We had a nice life, decent house, good jobs, a future I thought we were building together. And now I find out she's been lying, cheating, and stealing from us, all while pretending to be the perfect wife. The betrayal was like a punch in the gut, but what hurt even more was knowing she'd been secretly funding her affair with our money. That's when I knew I had to confront her. I couldn't let this go on. The next morning, I sat her down. I told her I knew everything. The affair, the money, the lies. She looked at me like I was crazy at first, then got defensive, started calling me paranoid and controlling. She told me I was overreacting, that it was just a fling, that Richard was just a friend with benefits, and that I had no right to accuse her of theft. She even had the nerve to say I was imagining things, that I was jealous and insecure. But I had proof, screenshots, bank statements, the texts. I laid it all out, and her face turned red with rage. She called me a psycho, said I was ruining her life, and that she deserved half the house because she'd been working hard and deserving it. I felt a whirlwind of emotions, shock, anger, sadness, and eventually, a cold resolve. I realized I was in deep shit, and I'd been blind to her true nature for too long. I loved her, or at least I thought I did, but now I saw her for what she really was, a liar, a thief, and a manipulator. The betrayal cut so deep I wondered how I'd ever trust again. I kept asking myself, how did I not see this coming? How could someone I loved do this to me? That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to everything, her lies, her cheating, the money she stole. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the fact that she'd used me, used our life savings to fund her betrayal. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, and the only thing I could do was decide what to do next. I knew I couldn't stay with her, not after everything, but I also knew I had to plan carefully. This wasn't just a breakup, it was a war, and I was determined to win. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that I couldn't just confront her and expect things to blow over. Jessica's reaction was classic: denial, blame shifting, and outright lies. She insisted she was just having fun, that Richard was nothing serious, and that I was overreacting because I was insecure. She kept crying, saying I was ruining her life, that she deserved happiness too, even if it meant breaking every vow we ever made. Meanwhile, I knew better. I'd seen the evidence, and I knew she'd been lying from the start. But what really hit me hard was realizing she thought she could just brush this aside and keep everything, the house, the money, her affair, like nothing had happened. She started claiming she deserved half the house because she'd contributed to the marriage, even though I built that place with my inheritance, my sweat, and my sacrifice. She called it our home, and I felt sick listening to her try to justify her greed. She kept insisting she was entitled to a share, even as I was trying to process the fact that she'd stolen $250, $0 from us, money we'd worked hard for, money I'd never thought I'd have to fight over. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was about money, trust, and my entire future. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut 100 times over. The house, the savings, everything I'd been proud of, she wanted to take it all. And honestly, I wasn't sure how to stop her. I was angry, yes, but also hurt. Deep down, I felt betrayed by the woman I thought I knew. I had to come up with a plan, a way to fight back, but I wasn't naive. I knew this was going to be a long, messy battle. In the days that followed, I started digging into her financial records more thoroughly. I hired a lawyer, someone who specialized in divorce and financial disputes. I needed to be sure I had every piece of evidence before I made my move. Meanwhile, Jessica kept up her act, crying, begging, claiming she loved me, that she'd change, that she hadn't meant for things to go this far. That was bullshit. I could see right through her. She was trying to manipulate me to make me feel guilty for catching her, for exposing her lies. I also started to realize just how calculated she'd been. The siphoning of money wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. It was planned, executed over months, maybe even years. She'd been funneling money into accounts, hiding receipts, and lying about her whereabouts. All the while, she was making her affair with Richard more serious. I found texts where she was talking about quitting her job, moving in with him, even planning their future together. It was like she'd already decided she was leaving me, and she was just waiting for the right moment to take everything. What hurt most was her blatant disrespect, not just for me, but for everything we'd built. She was willing to destroy our life together for a fling, for some fleeting sex with her boss. And she had the nerve to call herself the victim, to say she deserved half the house. I couldn't believe how far gone she was. It was like she thought she was entitled to everything, even after stealing from us and betraying me so badly. I started planning my next move. I knew I had to be smart, legal, strategic, and relentless. I wasn't about to let her walk away with my house, my savings, or my dignity. I spoke to my lawyer about freezing the accounts, getting a court order to prevent her from selling or transferring anything. I wanted to make sure she couldn't just run off with the money or the house while I was left picking up the pieces. I also began collecting every piece of evidence I could: screenshots, bank statements, texts, emails. I had to be ready for whatever came next. That's when I realized this wasn't just about her cheating or stealing. It was about my self-respect, my future, and protecting what little I still had left. Jessica thought she could manipulate her way out of this, but she underestimated how far I was willing to go. I was angry, hurt, but also determined. I knew I'd have to fight to get what's rightfully mine, and I was prepared to do whatever it took. Because at the end of the day, I wasn't just fighting for the house or the money. I was fighting to reclaim my life from a betrayal I never saw coming. After I got the initial shock under control, I started to see things more clearly. Jessica's lies were piling up faster than I could keep track. She kept insisting she was just confused, that Richard was just a sex thing, and that I was overreacting because I don't understand women. Yeah, right. That's what she kept saying, like I was the crazy one for catching her in these blatant lies. But I wasn't going to buy her crap anymore. I had the evidence, I had the motive, and I knew she'd been planning her exit for a while. I decided to dig deeper into her financials. I hired a private investigator just to get a full picture of what she'd been up to. Turns out, she'd been funneling money into accounts under fake names, using cash withdrawals, and even paying off some of her credit cards with the stolen funds. It was meticulous, calculated, and dirty. That's when I realized she'd been planning her betrayal for months, maybe longer. The amount she siphoned off 250 was enough to buy a new car, put a down payment on a house, or even fund her new life with Richard. Meanwhile, Jessica kept up her act, crying, begging, insisting she loved me and that I was the only one she ever really cared about. She'd even say she was sorry, but her words felt hollow. Sorry for what? Getting caught? Or for destroying everything we had? I knew her well enough to see she was just trying to manipulate her way out of it. She'd lie about where she was, who she was with, and what she'd done. Every time I caught her in a lie, she'd get bitchy, snapping at me, accusing me of spying on her, calling me paranoid. That whole poor me act didn't fool me anymore. I knew she was just trying to turn things around and make me doubt myself. Things escalated when I confronted her again, this time with the evidence spread out on the table. I told her I knew about her affair, her theft, and her lies. I laid it all out, screenshots of the texts, bank statements, the account numbers, everything. Her face turned red with rage and she started yelling at me, calling me crazy, jealous, possessive. She even accused me of cheating myself, like that was some sort of defense, but I didn't care about her accusations anymore. I just wanted her to see that I wasn't going to be played for a fool. Her response: she said she deserved half the house because she'd contributed to our life together. I almost laughed. I told her she had no claim, she didn't work, she didn't contribute anything but lies and theft. I built that house with my inheritance, my blood, sweat, and tears. She had no right to claim a piece of it, especially after what she'd done. She kept insisting, crying, yelling, calling me selfish, greedy, and heartless. I knew I had to protect what was mine, so I started talking to my lawyer about how to legally freeze the house and the accounts. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. She'd been planning her escape for months. She was willing to destroy our marriage, steal our money, and walk away like she hadn't done anything wrong. That's when I decided I wasn't just going to sit back and let her take everything. I started documenting everything, the accounts, her movements, her communications. I wanted to build a case, a solid one, so I could fight her in court if it came to that. I also reached out to a financial advisor, trying to understand how much she'd actually stolen and how I could recover what was left. I felt betrayed, yes, but I also felt determined. Jessica thought she could get away with this, that her charm and tears would make me back down. But I wasn't going to let her. Not this time. I had nothing left to lose, and I was ready to go all in to protect what was mine. In the end, I realized this was no longer about just the money or the house. It was about my dignity, my trust, and my future. She had broken everything, and now it was my turn to rebuild, better, stronger, and smarter. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was done playing nice. Jessica's betrayal had opened my eyes, and from now on, I was going to do whatever it took to make sure she didn't get away with it. The days that followed were a blur of legal meetings, financial scrutiny, and trying to keep my head straight. I couldn't believe how far gone Jessica was. She was still acting like she was the victim, still spinning her lies even as I had mountains of proof. She kept insisting she was entitled to half of everything, claiming she'd contributed just as much as me, even though I knew she'd been siphoning money for months. She'd call me cold, accuse me of trying to control her, and cry about how unfair everything was. Honestly, it was exhausting. I had to be smart about this. I knew her type. She'd try to manipulate the situation, twist facts, maybe even try to hide some of the stolen money. So I kept gathering evidence, working with my lawyer, and making sure every move I made was airtight. I also started to realize something else. Jessica was trying to make me feel guilty, like I was the bad guy for catching her, for exposing her lies. She'd throw tantrums, call me names, and even accuse me of cheating, like that would somehow make her innocent. But I knew better. I'd caught her red-handed, and I wasn't about to let her turn this around on me. Meanwhile, I reached out to a forensic accountant to trace the stolen funds. It was shocking how cleverly she'd hidden the money, using offshore accounts, shell companies, even laundering some through small businesses she'd set up under fake names. She'd been planning this for a long time. I also found out she'd been paying off Richard's expenses, flights, dinners, even rent, using the stolen money. That was the last straw. The man was just a pawn in her game, and she was willing to ruin our life over some sex and a quick affair. The more I learned, the more furious I got. Jessica had no remorse, no shame. She kept claiming she was sorry, but then immediately tried to shift the blame onto me, saying I was controlling, jealous, or not supportive enough. That's when I realized she was a master at gaslighting. She'd turn everything around, make me question myself, just like she always had. But I refused to let her manipulate me anymore. I had the evidence, I had the law on my side, and I was ready to fight for what was mine. I started preparing for the inevitable court battle. I filed for an emergency injunction to freeze the house and the bank accounts, preventing her from making any moves. I also hired a private investigator to follow her around, just to see if she was planning to run or hide anything else. Turns out, she was trying to make a move to move out with some of the stolen money, maybe to disappear altogether. That's when I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't let her walk away with everything. Jessica's attitude didn't improve. She became more aggressive, more bitchy, trying to undermine me at every turn. She'd call me paranoid, accuse me of trying to ruin her life, and threaten to take everything I had. I knew I had to stay calm and focused, even when she was throwing tantrums. I kept telling myself that this was about justice, about protecting what was rightfully mine. That's when I made the decision. No matter what, I wasn't going to let her get away with this. The legal process was draining, but I felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in a long time, I was taking control. I wasn't going to let her manipulate or lie her way out of this. I had the truth. I had the evidence, and I had the law on my side. I knew Jessica was counting on her charm and her tears to sway the court, but I was ready. I was prepared to fight tooth and nail to get back what she'd stolen and to make sure she paid for her betrayal. I kept reminding myself, this isn't just about the money or the house. It's about standing up for myself, about not letting a liar and a thief walk over me. I was done being the victim. From here on out, I was the one in control. And I was going to do whatever it took to make sure she never did this to someone else again. The court date finally came, and I was more prepared than I'd ever been. I had all my evidence organized, bank statements, transfer records, the texts, her fake accounts, everything. Jessica, of course, showed up looking bitchy and defensive, trying to act like she was the innocent victim. She kept insisting she deserved half the house because she'd contributed to our life, even though I knew she'd been secretly stealing from us for months. Her whole attitude was a mix of entitlement and anger, like she thought she could just walk away with everything because she was the wife. The hearing was intense. My lawyer laid out everything, how she'd siphoned off that $250, $0, her affair with Richard, her lies, her attempts to hide assets. Jessica tried to deny everything at first, but once I presented the proof, she started to crack. She kept saying she deserved her share, that she'd been working hard to contribute, even though she'd spent more time lying and cheating than actually doing anything productive. She argued she should get half the house because she deserved it for sticking around and supporting me. I almost laughed. Support. She'd been supporting her affair, her lies, her theft. The judge wasn't buying her bullshit. After reviewing all the evidence, he ruled to freeze the house and the accounts, preventing her from making any transfers or sales until the case was settled. That was a huge win for me. It meant she couldn't just run off with the stolen money or try to claim the house outright. I felt a flicker of relief, but I also knew this was just the beginning. Jessica was furious. She yelled, called me names, and threw a fit in the courtroom, but I stayed calm, knowing I'd done everything by the book. Meanwhile, I continued to work with my lawyer on the next steps. We filed for full custody of the house, and I insisted on a detailed forensic audit of all her financial transactions. I wanted to make damn sure she didn't get away with any more of her lies or thefts. The judge's ruling was a start, but I knew Jessica wouldn't just accept it quietly. She'd try to manipulate, to twist the facts, to turn everyone against me. That's why I was prepared to fight every step of the way. What was most frustrating was her constant attempts to paint herself as the victim. She kept crying, saying she deserved half the house because she'd been with me through thick and thin, even though I knew she'd been cheating, stealing, and planning her escape for months. She blamed me for not trusting her, even though I had every reason not to after discovering her lies. She called me heartless, controlling, and accused me of ruining her life. But I knew the truth. I'd caught her red-handed, and I was finally standing up for myself. In the aftermath of the court hearing, I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Relief because I had taken control of the situation, and anger because I'd been betrayed so deeply. Jessica's betrayal had shattered my trust, but I was determined to rebuild, to come out of this stronger. I knew she'd try to come back, to manipulate her way into some sort of settlement, but I'd be ready. I'd learned the hard way that not everyone is who they seem, and sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to fight for what's rightfully yours. Now I'm just waiting for the final settlement. I know she'll keep trying to twist things, but I'm confident the courts will see through her lies. And as much as it hurts to admit, I've become a lot more cautious about who I trust. Jessica's betrayal taught me a brutal lesson. Don't ignore the warning signs, and never assume someone is as good as they seem. I built my life with my own hands, and I'll be damned if I let her take it all away from me without a fight. Now, sitting here reflecting on everything, I realize how much I underestimated Jessica. I always thought she was the kind of woman who'd stand by her man, who'd support us through thick and thin. Turns out she was planning her escape for a long time, using me and our shared life as a pawn in her game. The betrayal cut so deep, cheating, stealing, lying. She managed to turn our marriage into a nightmare I never saw coming. The worst part, watching her try to spin her narrative, insisting she deserved half the house, even after she'd taken so much from us. The court case was a wake-up call. Seeing her face in that courtroom, so full of rage, denial, and entitlement, made me realize how far gone she was. But I also saw how the law was on my side. Every piece of evidence I had gathered painted a clear picture of her treachery. The judge's ruling to freeze our assets and prevent her from selling or transferring anything was a huge victory. It gave me a fighting chance to protect what I'd built with my inheritance and hard work. Throughout this ordeal, I learned some hard lessons. Trust is fragile, and sometimes the people you love the most can turn out to be the biggest liars. I've become more cautious, more guarded, but also more aware of the signs of deception. I've learned that revenge isn't about hurting her, though I admit I felt some satisfaction doing that. It's about reclaiming my life and dignity. I found strength I didn't know I had, and I refused to let her wreck everything I worked so hard for. In the end, I managed to get the house, the savings, and a sense of closure. Jessica's gone, and I've moved on, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I realize now that sometimes, the only way to deal with betrayal of this magnitude is to fight back with everything you've got. You can't let someone steal your future and walk away like they didn't do anything wrong. I've come out the other side battered but wiser, and I know I'll rebuild, better and stronger than before. So if there's one thing I want anyone reading this to take away, it's this. Trust carefully, watch the signs, and never let someone's lies slide just because you want to believe the best. Because when the truth finally comes out, it hits hard. But you've got to stand tall, fight for what's yours, and never let anyone take away your dignity. That's what I learned from all this. Sometimes, you have to lose everything to finally find yourself.